those next week. Let me get the roll sheet started over here. If you would, please sign and keep that moving quickly. Our lecture content today is beginning the 4 remaining world religions. Last week we went through the Christian faith. We talked about the basic beliefs, the points of their basic belief system. We looked at relevant history, and then we did some application along with the case study that we did at the end of class. So we'll do the same thing with the other 4 world religions, beginning with Judaism, the one that we'll start with today. This of the 7 lectures that you have is the most content-rich. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of material today, and we're going to move quickly. We have a lot to cover in the next hour and 45 minutes. So you get to write a lot while I say a lot. Before we get into the actual the Judaism and the next world religions, I want to give you a foundation, some philosophical frameworks that help us interpret all of our major world religions. All religions, not just the major, but help us interpret all religions. The first of these frameworks is called inclusivism. These are philosophical frameworks, ways of carrying out our worldview. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. What our worldview is, how we interpret the events and the nature of things that occur around us, how we apply meaning to the events of our lives. So the first of these frameworks is inclusivism. And that means to take in or to comprise of one complete whole or one unit. For everybody, everything to be a part of it, to be included. This not only applies to religions, it applies to any type of group. But when we're talking specifically about a religious context, inclusivist faiths are those that say something like this: even though the work of Christ is the only means of salvation, it does not follow that explicit knowledge of Christ is necessary in order for one to be saved. An inclusivist faith would say, Jesus may be the way that you believe salvation occurs, but explicit knowledge of Christ is not necessary in order for everyone to be saved. There are other means of salvation. That's what an inclusivist faith would say in describing their understanding of the doctrine of salvation. So inclusivism is best seen in the following faith group. I'm going to give you an example of one, and this by no means is an attempt to offend anyone. I'm simply giving you a real-world example of a faith that is in existence that we would consider an inclusivist faith group. It is the Unitarian Universalist Church. Now, you may be familiar with that. You may have heard of them. The Unitarians used to be separate and distinct from the Universalists. But some years back, because their denominations, their participants were declining, they came together and they joined forces. So from the Unitarian Universalist perspective, we know 2 things about this group. Their name gives us a doctrinal statement of their beliefs. The Unitarian aspect means they believe that there is only one God, and that everybody, regardless of what name you call him, is serving the same God. So whether you call him Muhammad, Siddhartha, Jesus, Buddha, Mother Earth, whatever name you use to refer to God, inclusivist faith, especially the Unitarian Universalists, say we're all following the same God. And then the Universalist aspect, what we know from that phrase, or that word, is they teach and believe that everyone, when death occurs, will go to heaven. That everybody will be saved and will be in the presence of God in heaven for eternity. So Unitarian Universalist churches, faith groups, teach everybody is following the same God, however you define God and whatever name you use, and in the end, we're all going to go to heaven. So regardless of what you believe or how you practice, we're all following the same God and we're all going to go to heaven eventually. I didn't change my slide, or I didn't update my slide, so the first slide says frameworks and this slide says pitfalls. We're still talking about the same thing. The second of these frameworks is the idea of exclusivism. So this is the opposite of inclusivism. Exclusivism is the practice of being exclusive or excluding people. Again, this applies across the board in life, not just in a religious context. Can you name some groups, or would you name some groups that are exclusive groups? Maybe groups that you have been excluded from? Other than churches, other than a faith-related group, what are some groups that you're aware of that are exclusive? Any thoughts? Are we awake?
I would think of like a group in high school, like if you joined like a certain club or group in that form.
Okay.
That's exclusive, like if you joined like a math club, where those are a group of people.
If the group had restrictions on membership, yes. So like in high school, there were cliques that you had to meet certain social criteria to be a part of. That's an exclusive group. In the college environment, what are some exclusive groups? Sororities and fraternities. You can't just go and say, hey, I want to be a Kappa Kappa Gamma. You have to meet whatever their criteria are. There's social criteria, there's academic, and there's financial criteria. In politics, there are very exclusive groups in our country. The United States Senate is a very exclusive group of people. There's 100 of them. No more, no less. And you don't just say, hey, I want to be a U.S. Senator. There's a whole lot of stuff to do to get there, and many people can't break that ceiling to get into it. But in regards to the religious context, an exclusivist faith is one that would say, ultimately, religion is about recognizing absolute truth. Whether it's the teachings of Jesus, Muhammad, or Siddhartha. But here's the trick. You have to pick one. Exclusivist faith say, not everybody has absolute truth. Because all of the world's faiths have teachings that are irreconcilable. And it's impossible to hold that the tenets of your own faith are absolute truth while simultaneously entertaining another faith's beliefs which are contradictory as truth. So Sam Heller asked the question, if you don't think your religion holds the best explanation, then why even bother? Examples of exclusivist faith, there are two that I want to give you. And again, no attempt or no intention of offending anyone if you practice one of these two faiths. But historically speaking, the churches of Christ are one of a very exclusive, considered a very exclusivist faith group. Because historically, Church of Christ teach that they are the true Church of Christ. They came out, they formed at a time in church history when there was a lot of division and a lot of uncertainty, and there were contradictory teachings within the Christian faith. And so the churches of Christ, or the Church of Christ, came out of that and said, no, we are the real, the true Church of Christ. And if you want to go to heaven, then you've got to be a part of the real, true Church of Christ. The second exclusivist faith, especially within Christianity, are the Missionary Baptists. Missionary Baptists historically taught they are the bride of Christ. Both the Church of Christ and Missionary Baptist churches in recent, I'd say, 25 to 30 years have experienced some progressive movements within their denominations. And so the historical tenets that they held to, those have become relaxed. But what I'm talking about are the historical roots of these two groups. So Missionary Baptists taught, or have taught, they are the bride of Christ. And if you're not a part of the Missionary Baptist Church, then you are not a part of the bride of Christ, therefore you will not enter into the presence of God upon your death. You will not be in heaven if you're not a part of their church. Some Missionary Baptists are so considered so fundamental that they even teach you've got to be a part of our local church within Missionary Baptist life to be considered a part of the bride of Christ. Those are considered exclusivist faith groups. We know about those two pretty well. Lots of us have probably had experiences with people who are members of that faith group. But any faith group that says, this is the truth, and you have got to agree and believe and accept what we teach as the truth, that would be considered an exclusivist faith. The third philosophical framework, even though the slide says pitfall, the third philosophical framework is that of pluralism. Pluralism is primarily a philosophical concept. And what it means is there's more than one basic substance or principle that coexist. More than one concept, one basic essence that coexist. I've referred to that word several times already in this course. We've talked about the idea of pluralism. So as we apply that to religious faith groups, pluralism could best be seen in a community where you have churches that have very differing faith beliefs, very different doctrinal positions, yet they share in common a similar mission. So pluralistic groups focus on the thing or things that they share in common as opposed to all the differences between them. So an example of that would be a community that has a Jewish temple on one corner, a Muslim mosque on another, a Catholic church on the third corner, and an evangelical church on the fourth. Four very different faith groups, very different concepts of how you practice faith, what that means, who God is. Yet these four groups all share in common the need or the desire to care for their community, to care for the least and the lowly in their midst. And so the way that they coexist is once a year at Thanksgiving, they come together and do a community-wide meal where they serve everybody in their community as a way for all four of them to fulfill that part of their mission. That's what a pluralistic faith would look like, or that's how it would look in a real world context. So there are three frameworks. Keep those in mind. Whatever faith group someone identifies with, it will be influenced by either an inclusivist, exclusivist, or pluralistic worldview. All right, as you get ready to begin your careers in nursing, I want to give you just a few practical pointers here when it comes to having these religious and spiritual conversations with your patients. Because already, there's probably some tension that you feel thinking, you know, this could be potentially offensive. This could cause some conflict. This might not be something that I would feel comfortable doing. This is not an easy thing to do. And yet, you will be trained and expected to care holistically for patients and to talk to them about their spiritual needs. So, point number one. Always remember that these conversations have an inherent tension. There is always going to be a struggle. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get doing it. But there will always be that underlying potential for conflict, so that the struggle will always exist. One of the ways you can help mitigate that is to know what you believe, to have a good, solid understanding of your own convictions, and be able to articulate that to another person without being abrasive or offensive. So know what it is that you believe and be able to share that with someone else. Thirdly, have some idea about what other faith groups believe. That is in part why this course is included in your curriculum of study. This gives you an awareness. This gives you some overview information about some significant world religions and their belief systems. As you get into your practice and you encounter people who have very different faiths, those would be opportunities for you to find out what it is they believe, either by engaging them in conversation or doing some research on your own. But have some idea about what are the differences between you and what are the significant differences that will help also manage that tension. If you find yourself in a conversation and it is apparent that there's a disagreement between you and your patient, or you and your family member, or you and your friend, the way that you can manage that piece is by affirming the other person's conviction. If you're engaged in conversation with someone about their religious beliefs and you can sense the tension is rising and you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling that, the other person is likely feeling that. And the way that you can help that situation is by affirming what it is they believe. And you can do that without compromising your own beliefs. You do not have to say, you know, you're absolutely right. I'm sure that I've got this wrong. You don't have to say anything like that. What you can say is, I can see that your beliefs are very important to you, and I respect that. You affirm what it is they believe without compromising what it is you believe, and you help manage that tension as you're engaging in meeting their spiritual and religious needs. Sometimes there will be people that push the envelope and can't let it go, and their need to tell you what they believe is stronger than their need to listen. When you find yourself in that kind of situation with an individual, there will be times where the best choice that you have is just to acknowledge your limitation. Agree to disagree. Say, you know, I can see your beliefs are really important to you, and it appears that we got a different viewpoint here. I know I'm probably not going to change your mind, and you're not going to change mine, so we'll just agree to disagree, and we'll still remain in communities. We'll still be friends. We'll still be family, whatever the relationship is. You can still be in contact with other people that you disagree with when you acknowledge, okay, we have a difference of opinion here, and I respect your opinion if you'll respect mine, and we won't allow that to dictate every time that we're together. And then the last point, hopefully to help, is the idea that you have already been hearing in your nursing classes and will continue to hear as you move forward in your semesters of study, and that is to stay patient-centered. If you will focus all of your care, especially your spiritual care, on the patient's needs, that too will help mitigate any of the tension and the inherent struggle that exists. So stay focused on the patient's needs and not your own, and that will help you in your practice of care. Okay, so we got 3 philosophical frameworks and some specific tips to help in these conversations. Let's move now into our discussion of the Jewish faith, the second of our 5 major world religions. So let me give you the 6 basic beliefs of Judaism. Number 1, the Jewish faith teaches or believes in the unity of God. Now this is even though Judaism and Christianity are both considered monotheistic religions, they have a different concept in the unity of God. The Christian faith teaches God is 3 persons in one, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Jewish faith teaches God is singular. God is God alone. There is no variance or distinction or differentiation in God. God is just God. Does anybody know what name the Jewish faith uses to refer to their God? Yahweh. So Jews typically refer to God as Yahweh. What about the Christian faith? We didn't talk about that last week. What is the name that most Christians use? Proper name to refer to God?
Jehovah.
Jehovah. So Christians refer to God as Jehovah. Jews refer to God as Yahweh. Still considered God. Number 2, God is the creator of the world. The Jewish faith teaches, as the Christian faith teaches, that it is God who has created the world, the universe, and everything that is in it. That is what makes them a classical monotheistic spiritual tradition. The Jews also teach that God is concerned with humanity. So he created everything that exists, including mankind, and he is concerned with human beings. There is somewhat of a personal element related to the Jewish concept of God and his people. That God is concerned with things that go on in their lives. That is similar to what the Christian faith teaches when the Christians say that God is a personal God. That God can be accessed individually and personally. So there, again, is some similarity between Christianity and Judaism. The 4th point in the Jewish belief system is they believe in a world to come, or the Messiah, a coming Messiah. At this point, it's, I think, helpful to understand some history of the Jewish faith in order to understand why this is a significant point in their belief system. Because the Jewish faith has had a history of being ruled and reigned by other governments. Neighboring countries, their enemies, just other ruling political and governmental bodies throughout their history. So when God created the first Jew, who was Abram, named him Abraham, then eventually the Israelites, as they were also called, they're referred to as Hebrews and Israelites, they ended up in Egypt. And there were, this kind of a long story about how they got there, but a huge portion of the Israelite clans ended up in Egypt. And they began to populate heavily. And so they were overtaking the Egyptian population. There were more Jews than there were Egyptians. And after a period of time, when the leader of the Hebrew, or the Israelites, whose name was Joseph, when he had died and nobody really remembered him anymore, and there was not another leader that came up that was powerful and strong enough, then the Egyptians overtook the Hebrews, the Israelites, and made them their slaves. So for 400 years, the Jewish people were enslaved to the Egyptians. And a sentinel event, a significant historical event in the life of the Jewish people was when God freed them from the bondage of the Egyptian rule. So when the Exodus occurred, is what that's referred to in the scriptures, both the Jewish and the Christian scriptures. When God freed his people, that event marks, that's like a huge historical and spiritual marker in the life of the Jewish people. So you would think after 400 years of being under the rule of the Egyptians that the Hebrews, or the Jewish people would get it all together and they could take care of themselves. But because of their relationship to God and their disobedience and that cycle of the people of God and the church, they fell into sin. God punished them or confronted them. Sometimes they repented, sometimes they did not. They got punished. And when they got punished, what that meant was he brought in other countries, other governments to rule over them. So not only did the Egyptians rule them for 400 years, the Babylonians ruled over the Jewish people for about 400 to 500 years. And then there was a time period when the Assyrian country ruled over them for 450, 500 years. And I don't remember if I mentioned it here or not, but that nation Assyria is the same country that we know as Syria. So the Jewish people and the Syrian people have been fighting their entire existence. And for a large portion of the history of the Jewish people, the Assyrians have ruled over them and told them what they could do and how they would function and how they could worship. And then, whenever Jesus came on the scene, the Jewish people were under Roman occupation. So again, that had been going on for hundreds of years. And throughout all of this history, the Jewish people kept waiting for someone to come and save them, to get them out of the bondage of foreign governments. They were looking for that entire time for a Messiah. And in the Hebrew, the word Messiah means anointed one. So they were looking for this special, significant, real human figure to come in and rule and reign over them. Because they needed and wanted or they thought they needed and wanted a physical king, because all the countries around them had a physical king. They wanted a political ruler. They wanted a governmental ruler. They wanted a military ruler. They wanted somebody who would free them from all the oppression that they've been experiencing from their neighboring countries. And so they believed that Yahweh, promised he would send a Messiah to save his people. This point is one of the biggest deviations between the Christian faith and the Jewish faith. Because in Judaism, they're still waiting for the Messiah. Traditional Orthodox Jews are still waiting for that political, governmental, military leader to come and rule over them. The Christian faith believes that God fulfilled that promise of a Messiah in the person of Jesus Christ. And so the Jewish faith, that's a major point for historical, traditional Judaism. They're still waiting on Messiah. Number 5, Jewish faith teaches that God has made a covenant with his people, Israel. He has made a covenant. Anybody know what that word means? A covenant is a promise. It's also a legal term. It means there's a binding relationship between the two people. It can be conditional or unconditional, meaning I'll do this if you'll do that. Or it's just, this is what I'm going to do for you. And I'm entering into this legal binding agreement, this promise with you. That is what the Jews believe God did for them. Because for reasons known only to God, he decided Abraham would be the father of his people, and he continued to bless Israel throughout its history, even though they rebelled and disobeyed it many times. And then finally, in their belief system, the Jewish people believe that God, Yahweh, has revealed himself to them in what is referred to as the Tanakh. And the Tanakh is an acronym for the canon of the Hebrew Scriptures. So the Christian faith has sacred scriptures that have much of the same books and information that the Jewish faith has. In the Jewish scriptures, the whole of it is known as the Tanakh. But the Jewish scriptures are broken up into like 5 parts. They have a section of history, they have a section of the law, they have a section of poetry, they have a section called wisdom literature, and then they have the prophets, or the prophetic literature. So those 5 groupings make up the Tanakh, and that is the Hebrew canon of the Bible. There is a big difference in how it is arranged between the Christian Bible and the Hebrew Bible. If you ever look at a Hebrew Bible, one of the first things you'll notice is that they don't read from the left to the right like we do here in the West. They read from right to left. So where we would pick up a book and turn the pages this way, they pick up a book and turn the pages this way. So it looks like you're starting at the back of the book. And the books are not arranged in the same order, although most of the same books are all included. And then the Christian scriptures have the New Testament, which is not at all included with the Jewish scriptures. So we've got these 6 basic beliefs, and I've interspersed some relevant history. Let's talk about some general concerns in the clinical setting and make some application of how to provide care for our patients. So the Jewish faith has ritualized prayer and washings. These are things that they do on a regular basis, daily, weekly, in the practice of their faith. So they will have ritualized prayer that follows their Union prayer book, I think. That's on another slide I'll get to in just a minute. They also have a list of laws. It's called the rabbinic laws. If you'll remember, rabbi was the term of the Jewish cleric. And throughout the history of Judaism, they have developed a system of laws where the rabbis have interpreted the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures. And one of those sets of laws has to do with the Sabbath. That's their holy day. Can someone tell us what is the time period for the Jewish Sabbath?
Sun up to sundown.
No, but that's close, sir.
Sunset Friday to sunset Saturday.
That's it. So in Judaism, in the eastern part of the world, this is not uncommon, they reckon time from sunset to sunset. That is very different from the way we do it here in the West. Our days start at sun up to the next sun up. So in Judaism, their holy day begins Friday at sunset. And that time changes throughout the year depending on the seasons, what season of the year we're in, the rotation of the earth around the sun. So right now, sunset, or their Sabbath would begin somewhere around, I think it's 6:45, 6:30, or 6:45, and it's getting shorter and shorter. The middle of the summer, it's going to be 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, at least here in our part of the world. So, if on the Sabbath, sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, our patients are asked to do one of these 3 things, that could be a violation of their understanding of their Jewish law. We don't have as much issue with telephones, as we don't have the same kind of issue with phones now that we used to. Used to, there was a telephone in every patient's room, and it was usually on a bedside table, and it was separated. You didn't just have your phone laying on the bed next to you. It wasn't that convenient. And therefore, because the phone was a distance away from them, answering the phone required energy and effort and could be seen as work. And in Judaism, you were not supposed to work on the Sabbath. Man, I'm hearing some kind of buzz. I don't know what it is or how to stop it. Let's see if that helps. Also the call light, same thing. You push the call light, you're expecting someone to come and respond to your needs. So you're requiring them to work. So if the patient is in the bed on the Sabbath and they push the nurse call button, that requires somebody to come down, exert energy, and do something. That could be a violation of their need to not work on the Sabbath. And then lastly is discharge. So if we get a patient and the doctor writes discharge orders, and that's after 5 o'clock on Friday, or not 5 o'clock, but after sundown on Friday, or sometimes during the day Saturday, which is not unusual anymore. And we're discharging people at odd times of the day, like all day long, it seems like. So if we have a patient on a Saturday that's Jewish, and we're saying, okay, it's time for you to go home, that might violate their law against making a journey on the Sabbath. I don't know if it's a prescribed number of steps or if it's a specific distance, but they are forbidden, traditional Orthodox Jews, from making a journey on the Sabbath. So those are things that we would need to be aware of as we provide care. Oh, and then let's talk about their diet. Jewish faith has a very specific diet that's referred to as kosher. There are 3 elements to a kosher diet. Can anybody name those 3? Okay, I heard the no pork. So it's not just no pork, but it's restrictions on what you can and cannot eat, and pork is one of the things that's prohibited. So there are restrictions on certain types of food. What else?
No blood in food.
That would go to how the food is prepared. So yes, when you prepare a meal according to kosher regulations, you do not prepare meat with vegetables with dairy. Everything is completely separate. You have 3 cutting surfaces. You use 3 different sets of utensils. You do not cross-contaminate. And yes, the meat should not have any blood in it. But you shouldn't prepare dairy or vegetables or fruit the same place that you do meat. None of that should cross over. So there are food restrictions, and then there are certain regulations for how it's prepared. What's the third element?
How the animal's slaughtered.
That goes to how it's prepared. So the animal does have to be slaughtered in an appropriate way that is considered, it's more than just humane, there's another word, but it's an appropriate killing of the animal. That's a part of the preparation. But there's a third element. Anybody know? No?